Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Scott Steilen. I'm Scott Steilen's stand-in. I'm the guy with the scratchy voice because he lost his voice earlier this week, and I'm trying to get it back. So the good news is I don't really have to talk much because these guys are going to do all the talking. Welcome to this. This is our 20th anniversary year of the summit. It is basically right around this time, right? Like this week. It's amazing how this team plans that out that way. In any event, this should be a really fun and interactive session. I'm going to prompt these guys with questions, stories, and thoughts, and certainly we'll entertain some questions from the audience. Tonight, we have a dinner in the Georgian rooms where we're going to be serving one of the G8 summit meals, prepared exactly how it was during the summit. So there's still room to sign up if you want. You can see Amy outside, Amy Walsh, who's outside, or you can go right to the hostess stand at the Georgian rooms this evening. I think it starts at 6 p.m. 6? Thank you, Amy. 6 p.m. So anyway, I want to just kind of jump right. Oh, one other thing. We're filming this, not because I want to use it against any of you, but because many of the people that work for our team, A, don't even know what the G8 Summit was, B, don't even know that we hosted a G8 Summit and how important that was, and C, have never really had anything like this to hear about the summit other than talking to long-term team members about what it was like and what they had to do and so on and so forth. So we are filming this for our internal use, for our team, so that we can educate our team about one of the great and really important elements of Sea Island's history. So that's why that's happening. So I'm going to quickly introduce everybody, and I'm going to let them kind of explain their role in the process. Bill Jones, to my left, doesn't need any introduction. His role was chief harasser, right? And Bill obviously was very instrumental in bringing the G8 Summit here, and you know, a big source of pride for the entire Sea Island family. Joe Hagin was, I never get this right, Joe, I always elevate your title, but I think you were Deputy Chief of Staff, right?
Correct.
Deputy Chief of Staff to President Bush. He was in charge of picking and basically doing everything around the summit. And Joe loves it so much, he's got a place here, he comes here all the time, he hangs out with us. And we love having him down here. Mike Kennedy has worked for the company for 24 years. And was here and a part of this and running around and kind of doing, as Mike said, everything and anything that was asked, because we didn't have any other guests, right, related to the summit. And Blair Webb was also here doing the same things, but he's going to also be able to give you a little bit of perspective on what happened inside, kind of from a food and beverage perspective, and a few other things that way too. So hopefully you'll find this time entertaining. We're going to kind of run through. I've got a list of topics to cover. These guys are not going to follow this at all, but we're going to walk through and kind of figure out where we go. Certainly there'll be questions, or if you want these guys to elaborate on something. Hopefully it's going to give you a sense of not what you read about, but what you didn't read about. Related to this process and the summit that we had here. So let's start at the beginning, right? Joe and Bill, a little bit maybe for the audience about how Sea Island was selected and what that process was.
Sure. So we started looking at this right after the election in 2000, during the transition into the White House from Clinton to Bush. We met and we looked at our list of international travel that we had to do. So heads of state, especially heads of state from the G8 countries, go to about 4 of these summit meetings a year around the world. And countries take turns hosting them. Today there's the G7 because they kicked Russia out, but the G7, the G20, APEC, which is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting, the NATO summit, the North American Leaders Summit. So in 2000, before he was even sworn in, we were looking at the first 4 years, and we knew we were going to have to host this in 2004, in addition to the Republican National Convention in New York that year. And so we started looking at it very early on, and I kind of had in the back of my mind that Sea Island would be a great place to do this. And Bill and I had been friends for a long time. My mother and dad came here in 1955 on their honeymoon, so I had a soft spot in my heart for Sea Island, and I knew that if we did it here, it would be done better than any other summit that had ever been done. Bill, you want to kick off the next phase of that?
Is this on?
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, as Joe said, we'd been friends for a long time before the event, and the way we became friends is Joe's childhood, I guess, best friend was Rob Portman. Rob was, at the time of the summit, a congressman from Ohio, later served in 2 cabinet positions, and finally is the senior senator from Ohio. But Rob and Joe grew up together, and Rob was my cousin. So we grew up, we were in the crib together and talk every week. Rob and Joe and I were down at Broadfield shooting quail. This would have been in the late fall or early winter of 2022.
2002.
And I'm sorry, I've said that, keep saying it. 2002. In the course of our just shooting the breeze while we're hunting, I mentioned to Joe and to Rob that we'd sure like to host something down here at Sea Island while you guys are in Washington, and I'm thinking like a congressional Republican retreat or a White House staff retreat or something like that. And Joe made the comment that the president was looking for a place to host the G8 and asked if we'd be interested. And I said, of course we'd be interested. And Joe gave me kind of a quizzical look and said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah," not realizing how big an event the G8 really was. But that really got the ball rolling, and that got us on the list of places. Joe, I think it started something bigger than 6 and was weaned down to 6 at one point, right?
Yeah, so we hired, we were behind in our planning because of September 11th. I mean, that obviously took all of our attention for a long time. So when we got back around to hosting, we hired an events firm that we had all worked with before in multiple places, and their assignment was to give us a list of 6 candidates to host. And they went to, I believe, somewhere around 30 different resorts around the United States, and came back with a list of 6, which were, Scott, you may have to help me again. It was Sea Island, Greenbrier, Kiowa, Biltmore, and then a place that looked like out of The Shining up in New Hampshire. One of those big white scary looking hotels. And at that point, the White House took over the selection process. They handed that list off to us, and I led a team of probably 40 or 50 people from every different functional operation in the White House. The First Lady's office, the Protocol Office, the White House Communications Agency, the Secret Service, National Security Council, I mean, on and on and on. And we visited all 6 potential sites, spent a night in each one, and did a very thorough evaluation. And then ultimately it came down to Sea Island and the Greenbrier. And the president, I had asked him if he, wanted to be part of the process at some point, and he goes, "No, you decide." So I was like, okay, don't need to hear that again. So ultimately we chose Sea Island, and I'm sort of making it sound like the fix was in for it, but Sea Island really offered, and Georgia offered, a truly unique set of facilities that hosted this, because it's not just where the heads of state are. There was a huge press filing center for all the global press that come to these things in Savannah. We used Hunter Army Airfield. One of the great complicating factors in these summits is most city airports don't have the room to have 20 head of state aircraft sitting around, many of which like the U.S., tend to be 747s or very large aircraft. So we had Hunter Army Airfield, which is where troops deploy overseas on missions. It has huge ramp space, so that was easy. We had the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Brunswick, which had housing and equipment and manpower, and then we had the airport here, which had a brand new hangar that I don't think an airplane had ever been in before. And the government leased that, and we put an security operations center in there that had, every federal agency known to man represented, but it was the command post for the Secret Service, the FBI, and the military, who were controlling lots of aircraft and defensive equipment. Again, remember, this is, a group of major leaders, and it was at a time when we were still, after 9/11, expecting to get attacked again at any moment. So the security was paramount. So anyway, Sea Island and this whole region offered just a wealth of great facilities, and so it was a home run. And so the fix may have been in, but not really.
Yeah, and to put that facilities piece in perspective is we were trying to get this summit at a time when the Cloister was going to be torn down. Cloister didn't exist. And the biggest questions the event group had, well, how are you going to handle this when your hotel's torn down, right? So we convinced them that using the lodge, Ocean Forest, the beach club, and private homes down the drive and the beachfront rooms we had were sufficient. And, thankfully we had Joe Hagin in the background sort of guiding everything. But we convinced them that we could do a good job with that. And we had 75 years of history hosting world leaders and events, and we had a team that I believe was second to none, still do. Scott, you still have that team, and they were able to do that, and I think, as you said, better than anybody else out there.
But it's not just what we do here on property, right? It was the community and how the community had to interact and deal with all that. Because you said, Bill, at the time, Joe kind of looked at you because he knew you didn't really know what you said when you said you wanted to host it. So how do we, talk a little bit about how the community came together? What did we need for our county government to invest in and do to do some things that way?
Well, we've always had a very supportive and unified group of leaders in this community, and part of the reason is we spent 75 years helping to build that and doing the right things on St. Simons and on the mainland and with the county and with the city. One of the great benefits was the fact that Ralph Basham, who I wish Ralph was here today. Ralph, at the time of the summit, was the director of the Secret Service. But prior to his role at the Secret Service, he spent 2 years as the executive director of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Brunswick. So he had a condominium here. He was very active in the community. He was a great community citizen. And we had as our security chief a guy named Carl Alexander. Many of you remember Carl. Unfortunately, he's not with us any longer. But I hired Carl from the county. He ran the county police department for many years. And he was a great community leader. So we had great support, Scott, across the community for hosting this. And I think, everyone in the community recognized what a benefit it would be, short-term and long-term, for the community. I mean, there was an initial influx of $300 to $500 million just for hospitality and the tourism industry, not to mention what was estimated at billions of dollars of economic development impact across the region and the state. So it was a pretty easy sell with the community.
There was one thing we didn't have.
I'll tell you about the other benefits of the event. One, Georgia Power, and I see Carl Pascal here. Carl was responsible for a lot of that Georgia Power work in the community, but they greatly enhanced the power grid in this community far beyond what would have happened under normal circumstances. And I'll tell you a quick, just kind of cute story. After the event had been announced, the governor appointed a host committee, a state host committee. And the first meeting of the host committee was at the governor's mansion in Atlanta. And a fellow named Fred Cooper, many of you know Fred, or knew Fred, was the chairman of the host committee. And he's up and he's addressing the state business leadership and this host committee at the mansion. And I happened to be sitting right across from Dwayne Ackerman, who at the time was the chairman and CEO of Bell South. And in the middle of his remarks, he says, by the way, somebody asked Bill Jones not long ago why in the world he agreed to host the G8. And he should have said, because it was great for business, it was great for the coast, it was great for the state, it was the right thing to do. But instead, he said he'd been trying for the last 3 years to get decent cell service here, and this was the only way he knew to do it. And in fact, of course, Dwayne Ackerman just sort of falls, you know. But if you'll remember, at that time, there was one little place out on the river in front of the old hotel where you could get cell service, and one place on the causeway, if you pulled over next to a bridge, you could get it. But as a result of the summit, we got a tower at Ocean Forest, we got a tower down at Rainbow Island, got towers all over St. Simons. So from that standpoint, it was a great boom to the community.
Joe, I interrupted.
No, Bill's exactly right. I think the Department of Defense spent about $30 million putting infrastructure in here, so all the heads of state could communicate actively. And I think a lot of that infrastructure is still part of the backbone of what we've got today. But yeah.
Well, I think for a lot of people, that just to understand kind of where all the meetings were held and how it went. So, you know, this building was down, and everything was really on the oceanfront side or down at Ocean Forest in terms of what was there. But one of the unique elements that remains a part of, you know, our history today, and is kind of our, if you will, our kind of closing room and our closing table when we've got people coming to decide whether they want to bring their business to Sea Island, and that is the summit room and the table that was used, that was made by a local artisan, Carl Doan, and that was a really kind of a unique thing. And Bill had asked Carl, basically, did he take 6 months out of his practice?
So when the summit was announced, one of the things they said is that we would be responsible for providing a table for the leaders to meet. And so we had the idea that we would take reclaimed heart pine. These were heart pine beams out of an old cotton mill in South Carolina, and repurpose these beams into a table. A good friend of ours down here, Dr. Carl Doan, many of you may have known Carl. Again, unfortunately, he's not with us. He was a local OBGYN, good friend of mine, and I knew his woodworking ability. He had a major shop behind his house, probably the size of this room, and would have been fifth generation in his family a woodworker if he'd decided to do that instead of becoming a doctor. So I approached him, and I'd seen furniture he'd made for his family and his children. It was beautiful. So I approached him one day and said, Carl, why don't you take a year off practice? We'll pay you for a year. Take a year off practice and build this G8 table, build the Sherpa tables. Each leader had a Sherpa, a senior diplomat that, you know, sort of guided the discussions with the leaders. So we had the Sherpa tables, and I think you've all seen the big table. So Carl did that. He agreed to do that, and Carl loved this country, and he loved the whole idea of doing something that, you know, the President of the United States would be using, and he had a lot of help. His, you know, credit went to his wife Brenda, who was a big help. His two sons, Brent and Bucky. Dr. Hewitt Maddox, many of you know Hewitt. Hewitt was there every afternoon after work, helping work on the table. And also Davis Love. Davis would go over when he wasn't out on tour and help Carl build these tables. And I was talking to his son the other day, and he reminded me that if you look closely at the table, the end of the legs of the table were meant to resemble President Bush's cowboy boots. And I'd forgotten about that. And he said the biggest feat was the, you know, engineering feat, how you keep this table up off the ground, because it, you know, it's 15 feet across, 3 inches thick, and weighs a ton, more than a ton. So anyway, it's a great story, and it's great to have it here, and we're so proud of it, and, you know, proud of.
What about where everything kind of comes down? Story of France.
Oh, I wasn't going to mention this, but also in talking.
JJ's not in the room.
Yeah, as long as JJ's not here, I'm okay. So Brent also mentioned that whenever they came across a piece of wood that wasn't quite perfect, they made sure they incorporated that in the French part of the table. So there are a lot of great stories about the table and the family.
Joe, you know, you host this G8 summit every year. When you and the president were talking about what kind of the objectives of the summit were, what did he talk to you about what the objectives were? And Bill, what did he say to you about what the objectives of this summit would be?
Well, you obviously want to put your best foot forward, and he was, again, largely after 9/11, he was very close to a lot of these leaders, especially Tony Blair, Prime Minister Koizumi from Japan, and the Canadian Prime Minister. And you want to show people a good time, and because you want to be treated well when you go to their country. And we were talking just before this started about how extraordinary this really was, because there are a lot of these things where you're in a cramped, not so great hotel space, and the facilities are just not as impressive, and you're cooped up because of security. And one of the things that we really tried hard to do here, and one of the reasons all of the heads of state just really loved their days here, was we had the ability to, we closed the road off, as most of you know, we closed the road off at the stoplight out on Frederica. And the Coast Guard was covering the marsh. The U.S. Navy had the ocean side. We had AWACS aircraft flying air cover with fighters in the air 24/7. Again, post 9/11 world we were in at the time. So it was about as secure as any place could possibly be. We had U.S. Navy SEALs in some of the houses on the beach. And because of that, we were able to say to these heads of state, you can only bring 2 of your security guys on the island, or whatever the number was, but it was a small number. And we were so confident with the security that we had set up here that these guys were walking around without the huge entourages. And, at one point, Prime Minister Koizumi from Japan and President Bush were drag racing down Sea Island Road in their gym cars. But they just felt they didn't feel the normal sort of oppressive security around them, and they would go walking on the beach with just 1 or 2 of their security guys, and he was really high on that. These meetings can be really oppressive and just incredibly tight, sort of irrational security. A lot of countries who are not as good at it as we are, just throw manpower at everything, and so you have mobs of security, which is the worst thing. And I always used to sort of morbid joke about somebody setting off a firecracker, 20 people would get shot, because these folks are just not, a lot of the international guys are not as professional as the Secret Service, but he wanted that light touch and the freedom that this setup was able to provide to these heads of state, and they really appreciated it and really liked it. And several tried to do that the next time they hosted as well. And his parents were here, as you all know, for their honeymoon. He knew about Sea Island. He knew about the quality, and he had very high standards for something like this. And he was very confident, and he likes the outdoors, and he was able to sneak out every now and then and do some stuff that wasn't on the schedule, which Bill can tell this story, but the thing he was most looking forward to was going fishing down here when he got here. And we were like, I don't know where you're going to squeeze that in, but we can try. And Bill made that happen. It's actually a great story, if you want to.
First of all, I'd echo what Joe said about how relaxed the event was once it started. And if you were on the island, you didn't feel like there was really anything major going on. But, if you got off island, you really saw it. And we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about not only what was going on in the air and what felt like the entrance to a military base on St. Simons, but the aircraft carrier, the Iwo Jima, and its entire battle fleet was just off the coast, just over the horizon where you couldn't see it. And we actually went out there, but overall, the president did know about it. His father, they honeymooned here. They also were back. Many of you know they were back as part of their 50th wedding anniversary celebration. President Bush Sr. Played in the opening round at Ocean Forest when we opened in 1995. So the Bush family has been familiar with Sea Island. So it was it was a warm, kind of friendly reception. But So in planning the event, Joe said the president may want to do something like play golf or go fishing or something. Would you be available to do that with him if he wants to do it the days leading up to it, which obviously would be available. And so recognizing that the waters were shut down, air was shut down, I had a small flats boat, a bone boat, fishing boat, and Mike, consummate captain that he is, volunteered to captain the boat if that were to happen. So I had the boat staged over on St. Simon's and Mike on call, ready to go if we got the call. So one morning just before the event, Joe calls me, and I remember distinctly. He says, "Bill, the president, I think wants to go fishing. I'll call you right back." So I sit and wait by the phone. He calls and answers the phone. He said, "Bill, the president's on his way to the dock. He's going to be there in 2 minutes. You need to get going." And I'm like, "Thanks for the heads up, Joe. I assume you've taken care of everything." Yeah, everything's taken care of. So I go down to the dock on the north end of the island, and President Bush is there with his dog Barney, little black dog Barney, and one Secret Service agent. And it is dead quiet. There's no boat. There's no mic. Waterways are shut down. Air shut down. So we're just standing there talking. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm about to go crazy underneath. I'm thinking, where's the boat? All of a sudden, the Secret Service radio starts going off, and Secret Service agent walked back and did whatever he did on the radio, and he came back and he had this big grin on his face and said, "I think the boat will be here in a minute." So in about a minute, Mike comes up in the boat, and I look at Mike, and I've known Mike a long time. Mike looks like he's seen a ghost. I'll let you tell him about. I'll let him tell you about the experience.
There's a lot more behind this story. I think that. Well, one interesting thing. It must have been the time that you guys decided down at Broadfield. We went fishing because I was on the boat with you and Rob, and you said, "Hey, we're having the G8," and I'm like, "What's the G8? I'm 20 years old. I have no clue what you're talking about." And he's like, "Well, the president's going to be here. We need to do something with him. How about take him fishing?" And I was like, "Okay, that sounds good." So that was a year before, probably. Maybe ish.
Yeah.
I heard nothing up until about 2 days before. All the other guides in the area were talking about how they're probably going to take the president fishing, and there's relationships baked in there. And I'm like, well, you said it, so I'm assuming we're probably going to do it. The day before, I think you said, we're going to take him fishing tomorrow. Go, be prepared. So we had the boat staged. One interesting thing is I got there really early. I knew we weren't going to fish early, so I got there probably at 5 in the morning. And I walked down with a bag of foul weather gear, food, drinks, everything, and I load the boat up. And I sit and I wait. I received probably 3 or 4 phone calls from friends saying, the president's riding his bike. You're not taking him fishing. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to go anywhere. I'll just sit and wait and see. And then sure enough, I get a call. "Come on, we're going fishing. Get over here quick." And I'm like, okay. And as most of you know, our tidal fluctuation's really big. And I think it must have been low tide. So I was under the marsh in a little boat running out of this little creek. And the waterways are shut down from, I'm assuming, Jacksonville to Savannah. Every quarter of a mile was a inflatable boat from all over, from every state. And every boat had a machine gun on the front mounted. I mean, it was a war zone. I mean, the shooting school had surface-to-air missile batteries set up in the skeet fields. Like, to say that, I mean, the security was amazing. So I come flying out of this little creek, probably running 40 miles an hour, and the guy to my left is around the corner, and he's facing me, so he doesn't see me, the Coast Guard boat. So I run up behind the Coast Guard boat, looking towards the dock where I'm going to pick you up. And they do a double take, and they mount their machine guns, throw their lights on, they cut me off. I'm at gunpoint. They're screaming at me, "Get on your knees, get on your knees, hands on your head." And at this point, the helicopter with the chief of the Coast Guard's hovering over my head. He's screaming on the VHF radio that, get him out of the red zone, breach to national security, where did he come from? And the Coast Guard guys are like, how did you get here? I'm like, well, and what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm supposed to take the president fishing. And they're like, no, you're not. We would know if you were going to take the president fishing. What are you doing here? And so my phone is blowing up at this point. And see, I'm pretty sure you were the one on the phone when I first answered. Yeah, you must have called me. And you were like, what are you doing? Are you talking to the Coast Guard? Get over here. The president's waiting. I'm like, I can't. I'm under arrest, and they're towing me out. So, and then everything kind of calms down. I give my phone to the Coast Guard guy, and I hear him kind of go, yes, I understand you're with you're not my superior officer. I cannot let this man go until someone tells me to stand down. And then you hear, yes, sir, I understand. I'll get him over there right away, which is, I'm assuming, was the Coast Guard. In my mind, it was the president. That's my but anyway, so they let me go. I run over there, and nonchalantly, the president throws his dog in my hands, and he asked you to go get a bucket of water for the dog. And his Secret Service guy that went with us in the boat, he nicknamed him Batman, I remember, because I guess the president said he'd just appear when he tried to sneak out, so he nicknamed him the Batman. And he was really cordial and nice, and we all get on the boat, and we're pulling away, and he said, hey, I'm on the clock now. I'm not going to be able to talk to you anymore. And I'm like, okay. And he said, but do we have life jackets on the boat? And I was like, I've got bags of stuff. I've got drinks and food. Yeah, I got everything on the boat. And I'm like, but do we need it? Because there were inflatable, it was the counter-assault team that was in around us at the time. So it was, and anyway, long story short, it was an incredible time. There's more to it, but do you want to? Yeah,
so what I remember is we started out going fishing, and I'm looking at Mike and knowing that, it's the worst time to fish. I mean, the tide's wrong, everything's wrong, right? Well, I happened to catch one redfish, nice redfish, about like that. And I'm thinking, this is going to be really cool. I'm going to mount this fish, and we're going to put it up in the yacht club, and a little sign that says, caught fishing with President Bush, G8 Summit, and all that. Well, pretty soon the president started talking about our fish. And so I looked at him at one point, and I said, well, Mr. President, for $5, I'll let you say you caught this fish. He didn't crack a smile. He looked at me and he said, Bill, I'm the President of the United States. I did catch that fish. And Mike can tell you what happened to that fish after that.
Yeah, so there was he was very sarcastic and funny stories throughout the whole trip. Two that come to mind. There was a big floating barge out on the water where they manned and housed all the Coast Guard guys during their break time. And he asked what it was, and we told him. And he said, well, I want to go say hello to all of them. And so we'd ease up, and he'd stand on the bow of the boat, and he'd wave, and they'd all go about their business. And I was like, I don't think they want to talk to you, Mr. President. He's like, oh, but get me closer. And sure enough, when we got closer and they recognized him, they all ran out in formation. And he gave a 5-10-minute inspirational speech to them all, and about how proud he was, and he had just signed a bill for new engines for them all or something, I remember, and they were ecstatic about it and very personal with them all, and they threw their hats in the air, and the redfish got on board, and I think we gave them some shrimp because we didn't go through any because the fishing was so bad, and they said the presidential redfish will be served for lunch, and they all cheered and went on. But one funny story to go off of the security side of it. So we're fishing, and we're right in between Little St. Simons and Sea Island, and they had people on the banks. And so all of a sudden, Black Hawk helicopter comes flying over and goes over Little St. Simons. And it looks like people dropped down on Little St. Simons. And long story short, the naturalists and the turtle techs that patrol their beach were on the beach, and they had their spotting scopes and were watching us. So obviously to security, that looked like a threat, and no one knew people were over there. And they got interrogated over there for like quite some time as they tell the story, which was pretty funny.
The only thing Mike forgot to pack when he came early was extra underwear.
Oh, one really neat thing just to talk about the president. When we were coming back to the dock, he leaned over to Batman. He was like, you think Mike's going to want some photos of this? And he said, absolutely. He said, call the White House photographer. And so they snapped a ton of photos. We got to the dock. I turned around and was leaving, and he's like, where are you going? And I was like, well, I'm headed back. He said, get over here and put your arm around me, and let's get some good photos. And he had it delivered to me the next morning, actually, signed copy, which was pretty cool. So
that is a great story.
Yeah.
Blair, let's stay on the security kind of protocol issue. I think every single person that was coming to work at Sea Island, at least coming on the island, had to go through a special security entrance to get on and get in. You got, dogs out there, people putting stuff under your car, frisking and everything to go through. So talk a little bit about that, and then just give the audience a sense of what was happening in the back of the house in the kitchens when they were doing all of the food preparation.
Sure. So my team was responsible for working with the Summit Planning Organization and then also with Host Committee and working through our key individuals that were with us, from Bob Flight to Elaine Deaver. But my team was putting together every event that was happening with the G8. So you think that the G8 consists of what's happening with the president and those events, but it ended up being 684 events that we were actually taking care of during this time, because we were working with Kathy Fenton, who was the social secretary out of the White House, and planning all those POTUS events and FLOS events. But we also had other countries we were planning things for too, so we had to go through those things to do that planning. And we didn't have a Cloister anymore. We didn't have our offices anymore, so we had to relocate over to where the inn is now, and that was where our offices were at that point in time. But today is the day 20 years ago that the wall went up. So the wall is when we had all the fencing and everything going up where the SunTrust is and getting on. So we were under some pretty tight deadlines to get this place ready. We had to be ready by 5 o'clock. And as Bill mentioned, the Cloister is gone. And in place of the Cloister was a 12,000 square foot media tent. And then where Scott's office, which used to be the old real estate sales office, we had the Cloister Pavilion. And that was housing for 400 individuals for dining for the delegates. But we even used Bill's office over at Ocean Forest for events too. But anyway, so we had all of this security up. And so we're having to try to plan how are we going to move. We didn't have a kitchen, per se. How are we going to move all these things around to all these events throughout the process of this event? And we were serving probably close to 1,000 to 1,200 individuals on a daily basis. That included the people that were coming in, the Navy SEALs coming in on the shorelines, and we have box lunches lined up, and the hovercrafts come in, they grab and go back out to sea. We have box lunches go out to the Rainbow Island. They got picked up, but we don't know who picked them up, but they disappeared. But so security for us was how are we going to move between the locations that we had put together for cooking and transporting. Because our hot food we prepped at where the Retreat Clubhouse. We took the old corn barn, and that's where we had all of our pastry production being done. And then, just to top it off, we decided we're going to go down to Brunswick and put all of our saucier and salads and everything down there to be produced. So if you think about it, we got 684 events of differing size. It could be, just a coffee break here or there, but then when you're serving a meal to the head of states, it wasn't a meal for 18 people. You had the 18 people that were the head of states sitting around the table, but then you had 110 Secret Service agents that we had a tent set up for. You had a tent set up for the Sherpas. Every event that was done for a leader probably was about 200 to 250 people. So if you can imagine this, we are taking food that's being produced from these 3 different locations. We have timelines that have to be met, and we're delivering this food because there's not a whole lot of storage on Sea Island to store things. And we were working with the FDA, Department of Agriculture, ATF, Secret Service. We were working with all those things to get these things onto the island and to the different events. And then, of course, when we were doing events, we weren't just cooking by ourselves. We had 6 people standing around us to help us prepare the food. They weren't tasting the food, but we had 2 Secret Services watching us. We had 2 from the ATFs, and we had 2 from the FDAs. And they watched everything being done and produced for everybody that was a part of the G8, not just the leaders, but the delegates, the National Guard, whoever it might be. So we were constantly being checked while we were doing those things. We were constantly being checked as things were coming on the island. So we had to do a lot of timing to get things done. It was really quite a feat for us to do those things. But and so I remember one time, and we had John Helfrich, who you probably know, he's down at Ocean Forest as our exec chef. He was the banquet chef here, and we had Todd Rogers, and we had Ted Thompson, were our executive chefs. Well, every morning, there was no planned breakfast for the leaders. They had their own individual, in their own compounds, breakfasts, and we had the big breakfasts for the 400 people, those things. But so we have to move everything overnight to come up. So we weren't sleeping a whole lot. We were going to bed at midnight, and we were up at 4 o'clock and having our lineups at 5:30 in the morning. So we were moving a lot of things at night. So the 4 hours we got to sleep, we slept. We had cottages on the island. So one day, Todd Rogers is asleep in his bed, and he gets his phone call. And the person on the line says, "Sir, we're not going to be delivering your pastries this morning." So Todd's going, and if y'all know Todd, he really has that real deep kind of voice. He's going, "What are you messing with me?" He hangs up the phone. The phone call comes back in. "Sir, we're not going to be able to bring your pastries here this morning because we had to arrest your driver." And he goes, "Nah, you kidding with me?" He hangs the phone up again. And then they call back again, and they go, "Sir, if you hang up the phone one more time, we're coming to arrest you. But we need you to come find a driver to get the pastries and things up to the bin." But it was amazing. Everything and all the things, the complications we had to go through, we never missed a beat. And it was fantastic to watch all these people. And I just say in general, the pride that every person with Steilen on this island was incredible. To be able to service this event was just something special for us. And you just saw everybody come together. Like I said, Mike, everybody else, we just did whatever we had to do to get things done. So I got many other stories about food, but I'll stop there if you want me to.
Look, I'd just like to comment on what Blair just said that's really important, and that is the pride that everyone took. I mean, there's not, a week that goes by that somebody doesn't come up to me and just want to talk about their involvement with the summit, whether they work here today or used to work here, and just how grateful they are to have had that opportunity. And everybody's got their unique experiences and their wonderful memories, and these are memories that'll last for a lifetime. And I think that's the thing that's most rewarding, is just to see the pride and the joy and to still hear it after 20 years that all the folks that work here have. That's an important point.
Just one more comment about security, because, and Bill, you probably remember doing this for us, but we thought that everybody was going to be here, that we were going to get nuked. We were all fearful until you wrote that letter to us. Yeah. And that set us mind. And then we realized how security was around it, because I even got accosted and put up against my car at one time because my son had left his slingshot under a seat. And so next thing I know, I'm up against the car and they're going, "Sir, is this yours?" I said, "No, but I know whose it is." And fortunately, I got away. But
well, I wrote that letter after talking to Ralph Basham, who again, because it's hard to sort of imagine today the angst around 9/11, how strong it was still. And I was convinced, having talked to Ralph Basham, that while this might have been the number one target on Earth, it was the safest place on Earth. Right here was. But what I started thinking about was, well, what if they do something outside the perimeter? What if they do something in Macon or Augusta or Jacksonville that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't agreed to host it? So it weighed heavy, at the time, and there was a lot of concern, I think, with everybody in that regard. But thankfully, it went off without a hitch.
The quality of the events and what's necessary to execute them brings up a really interesting story, which going back was probably ended up being the most difficult thing of the whole adventure. Leading up to the summit, President Bush was in Normandy for the 60th anniversary of D-Day. So again, the timing, it's amazing how it lines up. So he was in Normandy, and we were. I'll start to tell the story about the boat ride because it plays into the whole thing. But the Secret Service had come to me, and this is sort of typical in the White House. There are a lot of major events. There are a lot of exercises to make sure everybody knows their role in an emergency, and obviously security was a huge deal here. So the Secret Service a few days before the arrivals, came to me and said, we're going to do an evacuation exercise, presidential evacuation from the island in case of an attack. And would you like to play the president in the exercise? And I would play the president in a lot of it. We did exercises for everything, and I played the president, and by this time I had gotten relatively wise that it wasn't necessarily a healthy thing to play the president, literally. And my right-hand guy was here, and I said, Steve will play the president, and I'll just play myself. And I thought, Bill probably enjoy this, so called Bill and said, hey, we're going to do this evacuation exercise from the island if you want to participate. And he was like, absolutely. So at the appointed time, this was 48 hours, I think, before the arrival, we showed up at the old beach club, and we were sitting at the table, the actual table, acting like we were meeting. And these things are really serious. I mean, it sounds like fun, but your heart rate starts racing, and so we're sitting at the table pretending we're having the meeting, and all of a sudden you start hearing automatic weapons fire outside of the beach club, off in the distance. And then you start hearing louder explosions off in the distance, and the doors burst open, the Secret Service detail. These are like the guys who are going to be doing it for real at the summit. The doors to the beach club burst open. The Secret Service detail comes flying in, knocks Steve out of his chair onto the floor, pushes me onto the floor, and anyway, the shooting gets closer. The detail leader says, "All right, we're going to move down to the dunes on my count." It's just like in the movie. I mean, like, truly like in the movies. So he goes 3, and off we go, and the agents are carrying Steve, and a couple of them are pushing me, and Bill's got somebody with him, and so we go down to the dunes. We get slammed face first into the dunes. Shooting gets louder, and I happen to look up towards the water, and here come the U.S. Navy SEALs in inflatable boats up onto the beach. And again, the detail leader said, on the count of 3, we're going to move to the boats, and 3, and off we go. We get to the boats. And Steve has 5 SEALs sitting on top of him, face down in one of these boats. And I think Bill and I, were we in the same boat? Same boat.
We were in the same boat, but Joe was a lot smarter than me, because these little rubber rafts beat like this, when you're going fast.
Waves.
Joe got in the back of the boat. I got in the front of the boat. So I got the daylights beat out of me in the first mile and a half, and Joe's smiling in the back.
So we gun the engines, and off we go over the waves. And coming onshore down the beach were hydrofoils, big U.S. Navy hydrofoils, which were going to be used to take the other heads of state off. They're blowing sea spray 60, 100 feet in the air. You're hearing gunshots still behind us, and off we go. And we go about 1.5 miles out in these little rubber inflatables, and 1.5 miles out is a Navy SEAL, what they call it's either a Mark V or a Mark VI, which is a super fast boat that was designed for the SEALs. And it's designed so these rafts can literally drive right up the aft end of the boat, hook into a ratchet system, get pulled on board, and we get taken out of the boats and put in the cabin, and off we go at like 80 knots across the ocean. We go about 16 miles out where the amphibious aircraft carrier, the Iwo Jima, is sitting. We offload from the SEAL boats onto the Iwo Jima, and which is what we would have done with the president if anything had happened. And we had been told to bring dry clothes with us, so I went to the Admiral's, what they call the in-port cabin, took a shower, changed clothes, and I'm just getting dressed, and there's a knock on the door. And it was the Admiral, and we were going to have a long, sort of several-hour security meeting in a secured space on the ship. And it was the Admiral, and he said, "Sir, I've got bad news." He said, "President Reagan just died." So here we are, about to host all of these people, and ultimately we had the G8, but we also had about what they call outreach guests. So we had, in total, I think it was 22 heads of state here. Wasn't a lot more than just the G8 leaders. And in the way the White House works, I would have also been responsible for the Reagan funeral, and which I had known because we had been planning. Every president plans their funeral. It's kind of a macabre situation, but right after you get into office, they come to you and say, how do you want your funeral to proceed if something happens to you in office? So the plan had been done for a long time, and here I am 16 miles in the Atlantic Ocean on an aircraft carrier. I have the president and then 20 heads of state coming to Sea Island, and now we've got President Reagan's funeral in Washington the day after the G8 ends. And I said to the guy, I got to get off this. I got to get off of this boat right now and get back. And so we called it short, and everybody split. But anyway, the point about the events is Ralph Basham, who was, as Bill said, director of the Secret Service at the time. Ralph came to me and he said, all these heads of state coming for the G8 want to stay and go to the funeral. He said, I don't have enough agents in Washington to protect them. They cannot go to Washington after the G8. They have to stay here. There's just no way we can protect them in D.C. So I went to Bill and said, here's what's going on. Can we keep the rooms? Can we keep the staff? Can we keep everything? And oh, by the way, can you entertain them for another for another day? And he said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm getting out of here. I'm going back to Washington with the president. And so in the blink of an eye, Sea Island Company puts together what is considered to be, the lore is that the most fun party of the whole G8 at the beach club on the night that President Bush left. And all of these heads of state stayed behind. And as lore has it, partied quite extensively.
Well, I can pick up on that. And we didn't plan that party based on them staying. We had that party planned as a wheels up party for our staff and the G8 staff. I mean, this was going to be a blowout after they're gone. And so when we found out that actually 3 of the heads of state stayed, Schroeder and Berlusconi and the Blairs chose to stay. And somebody, I don't know if it was Blair, somebody came to me and said, what are we going to do? And I said, well, look, summit's over. As far as we're concerned, we're having the party. We're not going to worry about them. They can take care of themselves. And so we had a band on the beach, and it was kind of a big blowout. About 9 o'clock that night, here they come. Here come Berlusconi and Schroeder and the Blairs, and they had a big time, Joe. They danced. They had pictures taken. Anybody on the staff wanted a picture taken. They were the most accommodating. I mean, it was a great thing. And about 10:30 that night, I was sitting at a table with the Blairs, because Mrs. Blair was with Tony Blair. And at one point, she looks over at Tony and she says, so Tony, how come Margaret Thatcher got to plant a tree here and you haven't? And I said, well, we can fix that. So at about 11:15, I called Vasa Kate. Some of y'all remember Vasa, who was head of landscape and some of the development we were doing. I said, Vasa, find an oak tree and those gold shovels we've got and meet me on the side of Sea Island Drive at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. So Blairs went off, went to sleep, got up, and they got in their car, and as they were heading to the airport to go to Washington, Sally and I are standing over there with the gold shovels and the oak tree, and they pile out of the car, plants his tree, gets back in the car, and off to Washington they go. So that's the story of why we have a Tony Blair tree here on Sea Island.
So I'm back in Washington working on the funeral at about midnight, and I called the command post to find out what was going on down here. And we had an advance guy. Advance guys are the guys that, usually pretty young guys. They run around the country putting all the events together and making sure everything goes right. And we had a young advance guy whose family had a house on Sea Island, and he was working this event. His name Davis White. And so I pick up the phone, and I'm assuming everything's fine because I haven't gotten a call. And I call, and the guy says, he goes, sir, they're having a great time. He said, I think Prime Minister Blair and the Chancellor of Germany are at Davis White's house at an after party. And I was like, I do not want to know any more. So we had the Chancellor of Germany and the Chancellor of Great Britain at somebody's house out on the island with no security around. And anyway, But again, it all goes back to just what a tribute that whole thing was to this organization. It was really amazing, and the heads of state were really grateful and really had a great time.
Along that line, it reminds me of, we talked about the entrance to Sea Island being like a military base. And I think there were 300 troops stationed in that intersection. And of course, they were on shifts. And when they were off, some of the families that stayed in Black Banks had cookouts for these guys. And one of the soldiers at one point, as he's eating a big cheeseburger in Black Banks, said, "Well, you know, we came down here with a job to do, and a vacation broke out." So,
I want to be mindful of people having time to ask questions too. But there are a couple things I want to get to. I want to talk about, especially in light of what happens today at public events and whatever else. You know, how did we treat protesters and what did they want to do? Because I think that's an interesting story for everybody to hear. And then kind of roll into some of your more favorite memories, some of the things you haven't shared yet for all of you guys as to what that was. But let's start on the protester part.
I can start with the protest piece because most of you know we didn't have much protest, and one of the reasons was the main media center was in Savannah, and I drove up there one day during the summit, and there were plenty of protesters in Savannah. If you know Savannah, Forsyth Park was full of them. They were on the streets. You know, that's where they got the most bang for their buck when you had that media center there. We had a small setup at the college. Went over there as well, and it was very peaceful. And there were some booths set up, you know, with things you hear about climate change and different issues, but nothing big. One day, there were 13 protesters that decided to march from Brunswick across the causeway all the way to the intersection. And it was a day about like today. I think it was like 97 degrees. And by the time they got to the intersection, they were beat. And we had a Sea Island bus, and we had a cooler full of ice water on the bus. And our county commission chairman happened to be Mark Bednar at the time. Many of you know Mark. Mark gets on the bus with them and escorts them back to Brunswick. And they were so happy to get back to Brunswick. That was the extent of the protest we saw.
I mean, protests obviously can destroy a summit and do. And I can't remember if I mentioned this at the start or not, but the first G8 meeting that President Bush went to after he was elected was in 2001 in Genoa, Italy. And while we were there, we were regularly in our hotel getting tear gas. Tear gas. There was so much tear gas in the air, it was coming through the ventilation systems into our hotel, and we were all coughing and gagging and rubbing our eyes all the time. And when this got really rolling, there were 50, 60,000 violent anarchist demonstrators destroying the city. And the Carabinieri, the Italian state police, ended up shooting and killing one of the protesters. And so it's not, you know, we got very lucky here. And having the summit at Sea Island was a result of the Canadians the year after this just terrible situation in Italy. The Canadians hosted next, and they decided to change it up. And instead of doing it in a city, because these almost always were held in major cities, right downtown, and the anarchists and the threat of what had happened on 2011 in 2001, made the decision in Canada pretty easy for them, and they said, we're holding this thing in the Canadian Rockies in a resort at the top of a mountain, and part of their defensive posture was that they leaked a story to the press that where this summit was going to be held was a very large population of grizzly bears. And so it was written that there were a lot of mean, nasty bears running around, and they didn't have a protester problem. So a couple years later, we decided to do the same thing. So we leaked a story, and it is in the press that there were alligators and poisonous snakes all around Sea Island and in the marsh, because we were concerned that we had airplanes that could see the infrared signature of a body day or night if they were trying to sneak through the marsh, but the water cools the infrared signature, and so we were a little nervous about whether or not somebody could come through the marsh if they stayed just below the surface with the reeds and all of that hiding them. So the alligator snake story was very, very effective. And when these 13 protesters tried to march over from Brunswick, the National Press Corps, of course, was trying to say something negative about the summit. And our head of press for the summit was doing a briefing, and the national press were just, they were blowing it, they were making it sound like there were 13,000 demonstrators coming across the bridge. And this guy named Barry Bennett, Barry said, look, he said, we got more recycling bins on St. Simon's Island than there are protesters. It's not a deal. And so it all ended up well.
Mike, Blair, kind of favorite moments, things that you haven't shared yet that you won't forget?
I think one thing, and you can maybe expand on it some too, was the arrival of all the leaders that day. It was pretty neat. So we expanded the Sea Island Causeway in between the shooting school and where the gate is. We made a helicopter landing pad there. So the president came in right on the helicopter there. I thought that was pretty neat. But that kind of leads into, I was just around doing whatever Blair told me or Bill told me to do. And so I got to check in every leader. I ran their bags to their rooms. And one funny story, everyone showed up with somewhat of an entourage, right? Security, detail, these cars coming up. And I guess the 8th person to arrive was the Canadian Prime Minister. And John Kent, who many of you know, and I were standing there and we're like, who's this in this rental car driving up? And sure enough, came in and 2 guys get out of the car and Canada showed up. But with that, so when everyone checked in, they would do something similar to this, much smaller scale. We'd have a room set up. Do you remember that, Blair? And I guess their hometown news they'd have an announcement that they were here. And I'm dressed in a fishing shirt and probably flip-flops and fishing shorts and probably fishing pliers. I don't know. And, and I'm helping set this room up. And I go in the back and I come back out and nobody's in the room. None of Blair's team's in the room. And I'm like, wow, this is weird. And then all of a sudden a line of people come in. It's Tony Blair's staff. And I'm standing there. I'm kind of pinched in the back where I can't get out of the room. And his assistant, I'm assuming at the time, walked up to the table and they were serving tea. And we had the little milk containers, plastic milk containers you peel open and you put in your coffee or tea. And she picked one up and she looked at me and she said, do you expect to serve Tony Blair with his tea? And I said, no, ma'am. So I picked it up and I went back into the back. And it sounds like a made-up story. There's one thing in the cabinet in the back, and it's this little teapot. So I sat there and opened up about 100 little plastic things and poured them all in the teacup. And I walked back out and I said, well, will this do? And she said, that's much better, but you are not serving him dressed like that. And I said, ma'am, you have me mistaken for somebody I'm not. I will go find another server. So that was one funny story.
Blair?
Well, to Mike's point, our goal was to not be seen. We wanted to go in, set things up, be gone, so when somebody came in the room, that we were not there. So you blew it. No.
I also breached security, too, so obviously there's a path.
So one thing I failed to mention, which is we really had to rearrange.
Joe doesn't work for the president anymore. It's okay, everybody.
We really had to rearrange the entire resort, and Bill had set a goal for us, especially with the media. And the media tent, we wanted to make it the best that they'd ever seen. So Lisa Torbett, which some of you all know, was part of our team in taking and creating an environment in the media room that was, the furniture out of some of our rooms and out of some of our parlors. And we also had another tent, which is called the Cloister Pavilion. If you walked in the Cloister Pavilion, some of you may have been there and seen it through the process of time, but you would look at a room that looked similar to this when you walked into the tent. I mean, it was just made to look so impeccable. So we really got across really well in that, and the food was incredible. With regards to the food, just another story about, because we talked about security on food, the FDA were mad about temperature. And they would go around everywhere with their thermometers, and they would check the temperature constantly on all the food, whether it was on a buffet or if it was in the back, and those things. And we couldn't use what you typically use to cook with. We couldn't use propane. We couldn't use the things that are called sternos, which are the gel things you see underneath the chafing dishes. So we had to learn how to use induction burners, and then we also bought a lot of Le Creuset pots and pans to be able to do it. But one time, I mean, the FDA was everywhere and taking care and watching the temperature. Everything was fine, but it took our local Department of Health to find something wrong with the temperature. So up from that standpoint. But one story about food, we had to, in the planning stages, we had one day, we had gone through a whole process of putting together all these menus for the leaders and support staff. We had to do a tasting with Kathy Fenton by Closed Caption TV. She was at the White House, D.C. We were at the retreat in a room, and we sat in that room for 12 hours, checking foods, moving things around. But one of the events that was really important to them is that the Japanese wanted to do a special breakfast in their compound. So we spent all this time going through and creating these Japanese menus, buying the bone china, the special chopsticks, and doing all those things and getting them set up in the room for them. And the day that comes, the event's supposed to happen. Well, they don't show up. So we wait and wait and wait. They still don't show up. We wait and wait and wait. And at that point, Chef Rogers is going, Todd Rogers is going, we got to throw this away. So we had to throw everything away and redo it again. So we redid it again, got everything ready, and then they walk into the room, and the Prime Minister says, no, I want eggs, bacon, and grits. And grits happened to be something that people didn't understand. So if you understand, I mean, some of the leaders would take the grits and take it up and just let it drop down and look and go, what is this? And so most of them took some grits home, though, some instant grits with them, but that was fun from that
This is a true story. Prime Minister Koizumi was a big Elvis fan.
Yeah.
So it must have something to do with the Southern culture. Yeah,
That's right.
I guess I think one of the funnier things for me is that I had initially planned on going to France with the president and leaving here, and then I decided I probably shouldn't leave here, so I didn't end up going to France. And the result of that was I didn't have the right clothes for the I didn't have beach wear. I had formal wear for France, and like the day before the summit, it was after they'd started locking everything down and traffic was being diverted. I was like, I got to go get some clothes. And I work for the federal government, so I can't buy them in Sea Island. Can't afford them. And so somebody said there's a Belk's department store, and I got some guy to drive me over there. I went to Belk's department store, grabbed some polo shirts and some other stuff, and I was checking out, and he was sort of looking at me out of the side of his eye, and he goes, "You don't have anything to do with that G8 thing, do you?" I was like, nope. He goes, "Good, because they ought to shoot the son of a bitch who set that up."
Bill?
To follow up on what Blair said, though, about the media center, my goal from day one, I dealt with the media enough to know they're not your friend, and they're looking for something, to criticize. So we were going to have the best. They had the best food. They had the best accommodations, probably of anybody here, right?
They did.
Yeah,
Right, they
yeah.
did.
And also to Mike's talking about greeting the people, I greeted every leader that came except for one, and you can guess who that was, who didn't want anything to do with anybody here. Anybody take a guess? Putin. No, Putin. Yeah. So some things never change. But one of the Middle Eastern leaders missed his helicopter ride from Savannah. He was late, and they brought him down in a little bus. And the bus comes flying around the corner at the lodge and slams into the porte-cochere, dents it up, dents the bus up. The doors open. This little fella comes out slinging flowers out of the bus, and the little leader comes out all smiles, walks in to be checked in. And I thought, this is something.
Can I piggyback off of the lodge? And because I was talking to Brandon Veal, I said, hey, we're going to get up here, we're going to do a little talk about the G8. Because we ended up having a lot of Middle Eastern stay over at the lodge. And the president of Yemen had never played golf before. And so Brandon was deemed to teach him how to play golf.
By the way, he was a warlord.
He was?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, he wasn't the president.
I'm sorry. Anyways, he got up there on the tee with Brandon, and Brandon's surrounded by with security and guns, and he's going, if I touch this guy, am I going to be shot? But he eventually got him to be able to swing the club. And he had a lot of servants with him also. And he hit the first ball. Next thing you see, a servant running out into the range and pick that ball up and bring it back to him. Well, he didn't stop hitting balls because the servants were going out there and the balls were hitting them and they kept coming back. And then rolls up the King of Jordan. And behind him, if you can imagine, like 10 golf carts in a line right behind him. And he gets out and he's got these ruby golf shoes on that were just something else to look at. But he just wanted to make sure he knew that we knew how to play golf. He knew how to play golf. But I thought it was a fun story. So
I'll sort of wrap this part up with two quick stories. One, just before the event, the president invited Sally and me to go to a dinner at the house he was staying in, the Allen's house, and it was the president and Mrs. Bush. It was Governor Perdue and his wife, and Senator Chambliss and his wife. So there were 8 of us at a little round table in the dining room. And when we sat down, there was a little menu in front of us, and the president picks the menu up and he goes, man, peach cobbler, I love peach cobbler. Puts the menu down. I don't think anything of it. We have our dinner, and I've already criticized the French today. I'm going to get on the foodies now. So we finish our dinner, and I can see the chef beaming out of the corner of my eye in the back, and out come these plates, and they've got stuff dripped on the, around the side of the plate, and it's like cobbler made into like a little bird nest looking thing. And there are a couple of little peaches hanging over the side, and something about the size of a big marble of ice cream and some sticks sticking up. So the president takes one look at it, and I'm thinking, I know what's coming. He picks up his fork and he smashes it. And he said, where the hell's the peach cobbler? And I'm thinking, I couldn't agree more, 10 minutes later, out they come with a bowl with vanilla ice cream and a big old thing of warm peach cobbler on it. But
that was the second guy who didn't pack fresh underwear. Chef Rogers.
Yeah. The second one was that they had the leaders had a dinner at Ocean Forest one night, and Ann Hines, many of you know Ann, was a longtime, manager down at Ocean Forest. She came to me in a panic that afternoon, and she said, the president wants cigars. I don't have any good cigars. And I said, well, Ann, I've got just the thing. And I happened to have, it was a cabinet, a wooden cabinet that was full of Opus XA cigars, and that may be the finest cigar anywhere. They're in individual little wooden boxes, and they're loaded into this wooden cabinet, and there are a lot of them in there. And this was unopened. So I take it to Ann that evening, and the next day I went over to the clubhouse and I asked Ann, how'd the dinner go? And she said, well, the dinner went fine. And I said, well, can I get my cigars back? And she said, Bill, I got to tell you, those leaders took one look at that box and they started stuffing them in their pockets. They're in one cigar left, and I thought, they're just like the rest of us, free stuff, and they took it. So
Bill told me that story. I said it sounded just like a member reception we host for all of you.
And let me just say this. He means that, by the way. What irritated me the most is we talked a bit about the State Department. And the State Department, I really believe, Joe, that's where bureaucracy was invented, right in the middle of the State Department. And you couldn't do anything here that cost money that the State Department, they had to sign off on it. They had a little form you had to sign. Well, in the heat of the moment, I didn't get a form for my cigars. And therefore, when I put in a claim, it was like, sorry, pal, you didn't fill out the form, so you don't get reimbursed for your cigar. So that was my lesson dealing with the State Department.
Well, we have a few minutes to open it up for questions from the audience. So I'd like to do that, and then I'll just wrap. I got Casey Reagan in the back with a microphone. That'll just help. If you don't mind, it'll help for our team that's watching hear what the questions are. I've never, ever hosted a member event where somebody didn't ask a question. Please do not make this my first.
Several references to post 9/11 world we were in at that time, and at that time we were terribly worried about bioterrorism. So could you talk about our Commissioner of Health, Kathleen Toomey, and the role she played in making sure that everything was safe from a bioterrorism standpoint?
Bill, I don't remember that. I just don't remember I'm sure she played an important role, but I don't recall.
Well, there's a wonderful photograph that one of your people took that she's at the command center, I guess at the airport, and he's walking by, the president's walking by, and you can see her silhouette basically from the side and the back, and he's turning his head to say, goodbye, farewell. And it's almost like two lovers are never going to see each other again. It's the funniest photograph. You need to have it in your collection.
Well, I mean, that was, again, people forget that not only did we go through 9/11, but some months after that, we had the anthrax attacks on Washington, which in a way was scarier than 9/11. You know, they found it in the Hart Senate office building. We were doing amazing things to try and prepare for it and to protect the senior leadership from it. And so it was a big deal down here. It's a big deal to this day because it's so hard to defend against. But I mean, the guys from Washington don't come in and know everything. And you know, one of the things that we prided ourselves, at least in the Bush administration, the way we did these sorts of things was to say, you know, this is your hometown, this is your turf, and you know, if you see us doing something we shouldn't be doing, or you got a better idea or a different way of doing it, and that certainly would extend to something like, you know, bio defense operations. So it really did. I mean, that President Bush went down. He wanted to go thank everybody in the I can't remember, called it the MAOC or something, the operations center at the airport. It's a very large hangar, and we had gone in and built basically a second floor on the interior. And I mean, literally every federal and state agency were sitting next to their counterparts in that room. So I'm sure it was extensive cooperation.
By the way, that was Bill Todd that asked that question. And Bill, I'm glad to see you again. Bill, for many years, ran the Georgia Research Alliance and was involved with the host committee, the G8. Hadn't seen you in a while. I'm glad you're here, Bill.
One thing to add to that, though, like the community living there, and you can probably add to it, there was a lot of fear leading up to, you know, protesters, attacks. I mean, there was a lot of buzz. But if you went out to dinner or lunch, you would see a guy in a Hawaiian shirt, unbuttoned, you know, obviously a federal employee of some kind. I mean, there was security everywhere leading up to it. So that kind of gave you a peace of mind locally that we were taken care of.
Linda?
This isn't a question, but speaking of photographs, to Bill's point about who was the most unfriendly leader, I think like a lot of people, when we have out-of-town guests, we like to show off the G8 room and that table, but we always point out that photo with the big group walking on the beach, and Putin just looks so distant and unfriendly.
He's standing in the background and he's looking kind of straight down at the ground.
That's just such a true photo. And thank you for doing this. It's amazing, extraordinary.
We got a question in the back. I want to. So on the 10-year anniversary of the G8 summit, I had the opportunity to welcome President Bush back. He was speaking to a group that was here, and he said to me, I want to go see the G8 table, right? So we wanted to go see the table that Carl Doan had built, and at the time, if you all remember, we were doing a little kind of celebration inside the summit room, and we had lots of other stuff. Mary Tipton's here, and she was working on that with us, and he walked up to that picture, Linda, and you know, he said, oh, this is the signature photograph, because that was the signature photograph. And he started looking at it, and he's just standing next to me. He points, he's like, that guy was a terrible leader. That guy was a solid guy. That guy was this. That guy was that. And, you know, you're thinking you're standing next to somebody who's talking about world leaders of different things. And, you know, I'm not going to tell you who he said was terrible or who he said was good, but it was a really fun moment to see.
I'm Ed Howie. I had a comment. I am a trustee of the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force in Savannah. I had Bill Jones up there recently, and we walked into the gallery where we have our aircraft, and there's this pristine B-17 heavy bomber. And he said, where'd that come from? And I said, when the G8 was going on, President Bush came in here for a tour, and he asked the CEO if he could ever do anything for him, and he said, yeah, we'd like a B-17, and we got it.
That's a good one.
And
Hey, I wanna correct-
I thank Bill for that. I don't think he knew that there had been all of this activity outside of this area, but of course they were flying out of Savannah, and Hunter Field is part of where the 8th Air Force was founded. So it really made for a great thing. And as a result of that, we recently applied to the Bush Center in Dallas, Texas, to do a program on Masters of the Air. And they have given us a date of July 21 where we'll have the author of the book and a 102-year-old bomber pilot that flew 25 missions over Germany during World War II.
Wow.
And so we got it because I think when I applied to the center there, I gave that story and sent a picture of the B-17. Thank you.
If you haven't been to the Museum of the Mighty Eighth up there, I encourage all of you to go. It's an incredible museum, and it's a pretty moving experience. I want to correct one thing I said. I talked about the table. I talked about all the helpers. At the risk of hearing about this, I should say that one of the other great helpers was my assistant, Sue Sayer, and her husband, Tom. Sue would take half the day and go over to Carl's house and stand on the table and do that kind of thing. So I want to be sure that I mention
This is a good move. In the back, Casey.
I'm curious if the opportunity were to present itself again, would we do it?
So, a few years ago, President Trump had announced he was going to host his G8 summit at his resort, the Doral. And he got all kinds of flack for it, if you remember. So the team panicked, and they started looking around and reaching out to a lot of people. So we had them come. And they came, and they were in a panic, and they were, I wasn't here when Joe was here, but there is no possible way they were as prepared as Joe was for the event and what was there. They were just thinking, well, we ought to include Sea Island because they hosted a summit. They probably know what they're doing and so on and so forth. They had no idea what they were doing. They were only thinking they were going to have part of the hotel occupied. They were going to be okay with other guests coming and staying and doing lots of things. Then the advanced guy came in and he blew out his whole team and said, that's absolutely not going to happen. And here's what's going to happen. We need the whole thing, this and that and the other. So we put together, I guess I would call it a high-level kind of straw man proposal for him to do it. But it wasn't going to be cheap, and it definitely wasn't. And they ended up, I think that was the year they ended up hosting it at Camp David because they just couldn't find any other place to be able to do it. So would we do it again? Sure, we would consider it. Today, it's just I think the logistics are different, but perhaps more challenging in different ways than 20 years ago than when we had.
Our original plan that was disrupted by 9/11 was to try and lock the hotel rooms in 3 years in advance, which is when you have a big corporate event, they're about 3 years ahead of time. Right?
Yeah.
And it's not so much the head of state issue. It's the, I think initially I want to say we locked up 4 or 5 hotels in Savannah in addition to the convention center for the press filing center. Because you have 1,000 press or 1,500 or 2,000 press. You have, all
Well, there
of
were a
these.
total of 7,000.
Yeah.
When you add in trade representatives, you add in journalists, you add in staffers. I think they said the number was 7,000. Went from Jacksonville to Savannah.
Yeah, so it's a huge footprint, and you have to deal with it ahead of time. The thing with the Trump Doral issue was that it was at a time when he was getting a lot of grief about making money off of the federal government, which is illegal, and there were a lot of people that told him he couldn't do it at Doral, and he kept insisting. And then when they finally realized that it was not a good idea, then I actually got a call from the guy who had my job, was deputy chief of staff at the time, and said, would your plan at Sea Island work again? And I'm like, yeah, it'd be easier because there's actually a hotel this time. But I was secretly hoping that you didn't do it because he would have told the world that Doral was a lot better than Sea Island.
That is true.
Yeah, it's true. Anyway, yeah, it's extraordinary the footprint that these sorts of things take up, and to think about it happening. I mean, the NATO summit, which is large because there are a lot of NATO members, the NATO summit is either next week or week after next in Washington. And as a resident of Washington, all the residents of Washington are really worried about it because there's a real heightened level of concern about terrorism and just the demonstrations that will go on. Pick your subject that they're demonstrating against, but there are a lot of companies who are thinking about telling everybody to work from home, not come into downtown D.C. For the NATO summit. But this, as I said, it's 4 or 5 of these things a year all over the world, and it just, the machine just goes on, and a lot of resources get chewed up.
Got time for maybe one more?
I have 2 questions. One about the golf carts. Was that ever done before, or did we invent those golf carts that they loved? And then my other thing is, what did you do with the residents who live here full time?
Well, on the golf carts, it was a Chrysler product, now a Stellantis product, but it was a Chrysler product called a gem car. Mr. Anschutz, I believe, has one.
They were auctioned off after the event, and people had an opportunity to buy them. We bought 2 of them at Sea Island. And I think several cottage owners down the drive have them today. One back there, right.
So yeah, it had not been done before. Normally, and that goes back to how well secured this place was, because you would normally, especially like the president, nobody drives the president but the Secret Service. And it's a big deal. And here we felt confident enough that we could let them loose with those gym cars. It was a huge success. They loved them. In fact, President Bush, we were in the UK, and he gave one with the Union Jack on the roof to Queen Elizabeth. Years later, I think probably it was either 2006, 2007. We were at Windsor Castle, and his gift to the Queen was a gem car with the Union Jack on it, which she absolutely loved and drove around Windsor Castle. So, yeah, it was a great idea. I believe it was the idea of a former President Bush Sr.'s one of his staffers who worked for Chrysler, and they offered to sell them to us, sell them to the State Department at a pretty steep discount. And the other question was?
Yeah, it was asked to the residents. A lot of them left, but the ones that stayed had a great time. And the president, Lillian Clark, who most of you know, Lillian had a great visit with President Bush. She's got photographs from the White House photographer with the president with the gym car on the beach, and I think the people that stayed really enjoyed it.
Yeah, there's some great pictures that the president has of. The original rule was they could use the gym cars around here, but if we went to Ocean Forest, he had to get in the armored limousine to go down there, and that lasted for about 5 minutes. And off he went in the gym car to Ocean Forest, and a lot of the residents had decorated their front yards with, you know, red, white, and blue stuff, and they were out with pom-poms, and a lot of the heads of state would stop and talk to the residents. It just added to how much fun and how atypical it was for these sorts of things that they were actually interacting. I believe the deal was you could stay, but if you stayed, you couldn't leave while the president was here.
I was wondering, I mean, if they couldn't run to the store and back and do their normal.
No, and I don't think there was much pushback on it, but yeah, nothing was open.
Yeah.
But that was the deal, and it worked out well.
Well, I want to thank these guys for kind of reaching back into the archives and giving us a little bit of insight into what you don't read about the G8 Summit. I can tell you, and the reason we're filming this is because it remains, 20 years later, a great source of pride for us, a really great source of pride for our team to think about it. When our sales team is in there pitching it, when our members and our guests are wandering through, when our staff is in the summit room talking about it, everybody learns a little story or two, whether they were here or not, to tell about the G8 Summit and the part that we played. And we love being our piece, that little piece of history. We love it's part of it. We love the part that many of you in this audience played for it. And I personally am very grateful for the part that you guys played in it. So please join me in thanking these four gentlemen and going through it.